Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Holly Meyers. I'm the Assistant Director of Governmental Affairs. My pronouns are she, her. I made a cute little slide with this baby goat back when Program Board was doing goat yoga. You can see here some of the groups that I advise are the Committee on Committees, Internal Affairs Committee, External Affairs Committee, Lobby Corps, the Chiefs of Staff. I'm one of the advisors to Senate and one of the advisors to the Honorary Committee. So again, thank you so much for joining. In our audience today, we have candidates for both exec office and for Senate, and then as well as a couple members of the elections board to help moderate. I will be keeping an eye on the chat the best that I can, but if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, put something in the chat. Between the three of us, we'll be able to answer your question, but feel free to interrupt if I miss it, no problem at all. So as a gentle reminder, this session is mandatory in order to continue your candidacy for office, and to be credited for the session, you will need to be present for the duration of the session. So as tempting as it may be, if we could stay through till the end, I'll let everybody know, and then you can go ahead and take off, but please try not to cut out a couple minutes early unless you have a class or anything like that, because Andrew will be taking attendance right at the very end, and I don't want to miss you if you happen to pop out 30 seconds before you take attendance. Also, I encourage you to make the most of this learning opportunity today, participate as much as you're able, and you're welcome to also put any questions you have in the chat towards me privately if you don't feel comfortable asking them publicly. And while you're engaging in this topic, please do so with respect and sensitivity for one another and for the topic at hand. And also, if you need a break during this session to recline, get a glass of water, feel free to do that. I want you to take care of yourself. And I think there's one more thing that I wanted to cover. I also want to note before we start, I'm not an expert in the field of ethics. So today's session is not going to be comprehensive. It's not going to be like a course, but the goal is for this to provide an engagement opportunity. So we're going to have some polls throughout the session, and then we're going to have towards the latter half some breakout groups for discussion. So I hope that that will be helpful for you all. Also, this session today is going to be recorded. It's recording right now. And I don't want the recording to be a barrier for participation. So if you have any concerns with that, please let me know. And then the breakout sessions are not going to be recorded. So it's mostly going to be me talking and what you choose to share out after that. So thanks again for joining. And so I'm going to get started on today's topic. Oh, here's the guidelines of engagement. I forgot I made a slide for this. So I will pass these slides along if you want to read them, but essentially it's already what I've read to you. Okay, so our first poll question today, how would you rate your understanding of ethics? So the question, or the previous questions that would have been in the poll, have I added them, would be something like, I'm extremely proficient, I have some idea, or no idea at all. So maybe let's do a Zoom reaction. If you consider yourself to be extremely proficient, can you put a heart up? If you consider yourself to have a moderate understanding, go ahead and do the thumbs up. And if you have no idea, go ahead and do the little party emoji. Oh, thanks. Seeing lots of thumbs up. Thanks, y'all, for going with the flow. Cool. Okay, great. So keep that in mind, because I'm going to ask that question at the end, and hopefully you find some information here that is helpful for you today. Okay, so let's start off with defining ethics. And ethics is defined as the moral principles that govern a person's behavior and the conducting of an activity. Simply put, ethics are how people make decisions and how they lead their lives. It's how we determine what is right and wrong and the value we place on certain behaviors or actions. What this looks like is when you see questions posed like, is stealing always wrong? When is it okay to lie? Does the end justify the means? And the answers that we have to these questions are indicative of our beliefs, which is our system of ethics, right? This determines when it's okay to steal, when it's okay to lie, or not at all entirely. And so how and why does this matter to you as a candidate? So all organizations have shared values or expectations of some kind, right? This may look like a code of conduct. This could look like a mission statement. And a lot of organizations, including UCSB, they also have a statement of ethics. And these are essentially shared agreements that help direct our behavior. Associated students in particular, and you all as members of that association, are a part of a 501c3 nonprofit. We are student run and student funded. And at the very least, each one of us, as we participate in our programs, we all have an obligation to be good stewards of those student fees and to prevent the proliferation of those student fees. Oh man, I'm really bummed now that I didn't add these poll questions. Okay, so which of the following is an ethical issue that applies to associated students? And the question would have asked you, please select all that apply. And so the first answer would have been 1, how we disagree with one another, 2, our work-life balance, 3, representation of constituencies, 4, how we choose appointed membership of BCUs, and 5, all of the above. So we're gonna wing it. Can you all put in the chat what you think that it would be? Number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And I can reread those if that would be helpful. Or if anybody, you don't all have to answer, just somebody can jump in. Oh, 5, all of the above. Great, it looks like that's the most answers. If you answered 5, which looks like all of you, you are correct. So thank you for going with the flow on that again with me. So yes, you are correct. How we disagree with one another is indicative also of our values, how we believe what is good behavior and bad behavior, right? All of these like overarching questions about how we engage with one another. Work-life balance is a trickier one, but also the way that we practice sustainable work, the way that we practice self-care, our values around, do we work all hours of the day? Do we have boundaries on our time? What, as an organization, are we doing about just like work-life balance, our balance in our work and the values around that? Representation of constituencies is also an ethical question in that when you are elected to an office, when you think about who you represent, do you consider yourself a representative of the student body? Do you consider yourself a representative of the folks that elected you? Those can be some questions that arise when you think about representation. And also how we choose appointed members of BCUs, right? So we have a process for this, the appointment process, and that speaks to our values about equity and allowing all students the opportunity to participate in the association, to have a fair application process, those kinds of things are what ethical issues, considerations that may apply. So thank you all for participating. So you may be asking, how does ethics impact our elections? So like many other organizations, our elections process also operates from a set of guiding principles, like I mentioned. Many of these are codified in the elections code, but they are essentially designed to help the process run smoothly, ensure that everything is fair, and that all students have an access to vote. So the 5 ethical practices in elections I want to cover today in our next slide are going to talk about independence, transparency, integrity, competence, and fairness. So independence looks like avoiding conflicts of interest and treating all parties fairly by adhering to the law or legal code in our case. And this is operating outside of party influence. Transparency is how an elections office conducts its business. Integrity is how an election office or board has checks on its decision making, as well as an office or officer not using their office to express partisan support or opposition. You can see this in our elections board, as they are nonpartisan, and so they do not endorse any candidates. They are there to support the elections process. That's kind of what that looks like. Competence is how an election official serves all precincts. This would be students in our case, with equitable attention to detail. This also refers to ease of access to vote. The last value, fairness, means involving a community stakeholder input on decisions that could be perceived as biased and asking for input in election management decisions. Our elections board structure is a good example of this, right? It's not one individual person that's making a decision. Their meetings are public. They ask for public input regularly. That's kind of what that would look like. And so again, as a candidate, what is your role, or what principles should you consider as you engage in the elections process? So candidates play a role in the culture of elections and even in the culture of associated students at large. Unethical campaigns can create cynicism, distrust, and disengagement in the organization. And campaigning that interferes with the voter's ability to make an informed decision could be perceived as deceptive and could further erode trust, both in the individual and in the organization. Ethical campaigns can, on the contrary, contribute to a supportive, collaborative, and successful culture and associated students. And you are a part of creating that culture. And so what ethical dilemmas could you face as a candidate or even as an officer? So these questions look like, should you vote against or avoid collaboration with those who ran or worked against you? Can you show favoritism to your campaign supporters? Whom do you represent? Your personal values and agenda, the values of your party, or the needs of the student body? On what matters should you recuse yourself? And lastly, using privileged access to student government resources in the community to develop your campaign. The last one is a little easier because we have a policy against that in the elections code, but hopefully these questions give you an idea of some considerations. Okay, so next we're going to go into breakout rooms unless anybody has any questions about what I've covered already. No? Okay. So this is going to be an opportunity for discussion. And so the first scenario that I'm going to ask you all to consider is written here on the slide. You can see all three of them if you want an advanced peek. But the first scenario reads, a colleague who supported your campaign wants your help writing a bill or meeting with administration, but you do not agree with their stance. What would you do? Would your answer change if you agreed with them? So I want to ask how your discussion went. Can somebody please share with all of us some of the considerations that you discussed or answers to the questions, etc.
I can give my response. First of all, hi everyone. Geo, pronouns they, them, theirs. I answered this question by saying that in not agreeing with someone's stance, my first thought is considering like whether this is going to do more harm than good. I mentioned to my breakout group that their disagreements look very differently, and sometimes we can disagree on how we want to approach certain issues. And then approaching issues differently, like that's still, it might just be something that we disagree with, but it might work in their favor and might actually help the student body. So I think in kind of like that kind of situation, like that's where I'm really starting to think about is like, is this something that I disagree with because it's like completely harmful and it's something that like goes against like what I believe and like I don't want to take part in it, or is this something that I just disagree with on like how we're going to approach it, but like they're still asking for myself for a reason, so maybe I can contribute to this, or maybe I can like benefit from this in the future and take something from it. And I think like if I agreed with them in that stance, like it would only make it easier to work together and ensure that like we are putting the students' needs and priorities like number one.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I appreciate your process within your thinking of how you remark that you are considering different approaches to maybe the same end goal. I think that's a really great tool of communication and problem solving. So I appreciate that you pointed that out. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to share? Any other comments? Did everybody kind of come to the same general idea? You can thumbs up, react, or
in our group,
yeah.
we were discussing how the expectation is that the people who voted for you voted for also the values and your positions on certain issues. So you sort of have a responsibility to translate those values into your work in the Senate, to have some to keep your integrity. So you would not support a bill that goes against your values unless maybe it's for the greater good of your constituents or the student body in general.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think that that is definitely a question to consider, right? That what does representation mean to you? And I think that you pointed that out very well with this idea of voters voting for you as more of like a holistic vote, in the sense they vote for you and your perspective and your work history. But I appreciate that you also noted wanting to like work for the greater good. So I think you highlighted some good considerations there as well. Thank you for sharing.
Hi, Holly. I wanted to share something, a perspective that I took on this. I know I wasn't in any of the breakout rooms. Hi, everyone. My name's Austin. I was planning on I haven't actually gone through this presentation, so I wasn't sure what it would lead. So I wasn't sure in which ways I would be able to participate as a former senator and a former candidate, and now a member of the elections board. But one thing that this scenario brought to mind is, if you do disagree with someone, not waiting until the bill gets to the Senate. I definitely think that a lot of conversations can happen outside of meetings in like one-on-one situations, to share opinions and kind of avoid frustrations when you are in the limelight in front of everyone. Because I know that really does heighten tensions between people. So I definitely think if there's a chance that you do disagree, maybe finding the opportunity outside of, say, the Senate to speak would be a wonderful choice.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think you highlighted really that there are multiple opportunities for this dilemma to present itself. From the initial, even like meetup, you could call it, right? Like where somebody comes to you and you're feeling this pressure to take an action, right? Whether it's writing a bill, connect somebody with administration. But there are, like you said, Austin, are multiple steps in which this could present itself. And one of those is at the Senate meeting, where that pressure and the dynamic can be heightened even more. And so I think that that was really great. Thank you for sharing. All right, welcome back, everyone. Looks like we have everyone back with us. Thanks so much for participating. So I want to ask for a volunteer to share out what their discussion or their answers were to this first scenario. And hold on, let me open up the participants. I saw Gerlene's hand first, so you can go ahead and start.
Hi everyone. I was in group 1, and I think like we were just bouncing back ideas, and I think the common thing that we came to was just like creating an environment where we can just like talk to each other, if it's like one-on-one or if it's multiple people. Just like creating an environment where you don't have to like go to like try and convince them of what it is that you believe, but just trying to understand where the other person is coming from. And then we also talked about finding some sort of like negotiation is really important. Like if you don't agree with somebody and your idea doesn't change, there is always a middle ground you can find, but just starting by creating that forum for a healthy discussion.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think that that's a great point. And then next, April, I see your hand.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm April, and I'm in Breakout Room 3, I think. So what we talked about was we really think that it depends on the situation, and generally if we don't agree with it and if we don't think that it is the best thing that we want for our constituents, we might direct them to other people that we know that might agree with them and want to work on the same thing. But then again, it depends on the situation, and it really depends on what type of bill they're trying to pass or what type of meeting they're trying to have and what their end goal is. So it really depends on the situation. And I also think Colton, who's in our group, brought up a really good question. He asked if we would support a legislation that our constituents support, but we don't. And I think that's really interesting. That also really depends on the situation and what, I guess, like how much support are we seeing from our constituents in a lot of other situations. But yeah, we had a great talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And next, Esme.
Howdy, y'all. Esme, she, they pronouns. I think something we said was that, also y'all can correct me. I don't want to misquote group number 4. But something we said was that ultimately we won't prohibit you. We'll redirect you if we truly disagree with it. But there's very little things in associated students that we ultimately can't work out through either like mediation and discussion. And largely it just comes down to like, we won't stop you, but we do have our own reservations and our own like guiding principles. So we may not necessarily like be the ones to write that bill on your behalf. Hello. Sorry, my dog.
No need to be sorry. But yeah, thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have any comments or discussion points that they want to share? Shva.
Hi everyone. Can you all see me? Yeah, I was going to say I agree. I was in the same group as Esme, and I feel like our group came to the consensus that the most important part of our position is that we're a representative of our constituents. Therefore, directly involving yourself in that way, you have to always have an awareness of like your position, what that entails, and in addition, the ethics behind, you know, of course, supporting or not supporting, and just basically providing your constituents with the resources they need to get what they want done. And then it is up to, of course, the constituents to vote on it. So I know that one of the biggest things is that we just remain a representative, and you have to be cognizant of the different aspects that holds, and kind of sometimes not necessarily putting yourself and your personal beliefs on a shelf, but like sometimes setting it aside in order to delegate them to where they need to go, so that if that's the avenue they want to go down, they can do it without directly involving yourself.
Yeah, no, those are great points. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have anything they want to add or to share before we move on to the next scenario?
Hi, Holly. So my name's Austin. everyone. And I'm on elections board, but last year I was a senator, and in of these sessions, I added a little something here. So I want to just kind of echo what I said then, just so that everyone kind of gets the same thing. Don't want to favor one group over the other. So what I said to this question really was not so much about the question, but like that the work done in a situation like this, where there is a disagreement, doesn't always have to happen on the Senate floor or like in that big meeting setting. And that a lot of work really can go on outside of those meetings, as to not kind of boggle down those big meetings where there's like a lot of people involved, and really to have like those one-on-one conversations privately to kind of understand each other and work out what you may or may not agree on. So I just wanted to add that little piece, since I did in the other group.
Yeah, thanks so much, Austin. Are there any other comments or additions or anything else?
I can add for our group too. I guess it kind of just echoes what everyone else was saying, but we focused a lot on making sure we're challenging our own implicit biases, whether we choose to expedite the process for certain people or not. So just being aware of that is like another layer to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, the question is really guided to consider, like you said, how we respond to potential pressures. And I think that bias absolutely plays a role in that, as it does with everything, really. So thank you so much for pointing that out and sharing. And then B, I see your hands next.
Hi, everyone. I was in group 1. Just to add, I would say that a stance that I would take when I'm writing a piece of legislation for anyone is not whether or not I agree with it, but if it will cause harm to a community that I feel like I represent, or that my constituents represent, or any of the other senators, because Senate is a space for different beliefs to emerge, for us to have a conversation, And so I feel like it's good to have beliefs that you disagree on, other perspectives coming in, because it really shows how diverse our Senate is and the beliefs that we have. And so I don't always agree with what we're writing, but I do see truth in what others are doing and what the constituents want. So I support that effort. And I think that that's very ethical, because we all have implicit bias, whether we agree with it or not. It's in us. So by having so many senators on the floor, we eliminate that issue all the time. So with that, I yield.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I think in our last session, another participant shared that also, that they examine essentially like the impact, which is interesting, because there's an ethical like framework for how we imagine what the impact will look like. And so I think that is a great addition for sure, because it's a good thing to consider. So thank you so much for sharing. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next scenario. Let me X out of this, and hopefully you all can see it, but I'm going to read it out loud. So the next scenario I would like you all to discuss reads: a supporter of your campaign approaches you about becoming involved in a BCU, which stands for a board, commission, and unit. They've mentioned that they have a conflict with one of the members of the BCU and want to avoid an awkward interview. And so they ask you to appoint them directly to the committee. So in considering this scenario, just as an aside, assume for a second that you all are going to have an appointment power, a magic wand situation, though I know that that is reserved for they as president. So we're just going to pretend for a moment that each of you, as you consider this question. And then next it reads, what do you do? Does your answer change if there's no conflict and your supporter wants to avoid a hassle? So how did that discussion go for this second scenario? Does anybody want to share their thoughts, dilemmas? any maybe questions you had that came up?
In my breakout room, when we discussed this, we couldn't really figure out any way you could say yes to just letting them or just appointing them to the BCU, because it's just unethical. And like, if there's a conflict, people should be able to work that out or set it aside for professional purposes.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I think that definitely speaks to your values or your boundaries of like, this is hard stance, no, unethical to avoid the process and avoid resolving the conflict. So thank you so much for sharing. Did anybody else reach the same conclusion, or is there another perspective that someone can share?
I think this scenario highlights or brings up the question of whether it's right that you can often only advance in whatever field only if you have connections.
Yeah, that is a really great point. Yeah, and you know, we have a lot of practices that are designed to combat that, which is why, in my opinion, this is a tricky scenario, right? Because we don't necessarily want to contribute to that culture. You know, of course, we want to encourage networking and collaboration, but not at the expense of equity, right? Where we create a scenario in which you can only advance if you know somebody. So thank you for sharing that, Eric. Anybody else have any thoughts? All right, thanks so much, everybody. Welcome back. So same deal with the last scenario. Can I get a couple of volunteers to share out some of the points of their discussion? Okay, and the first hand I see is Philip and then Shva.
Everyone, I think my group from group 2, I think that was the right group. Our general consensus was just that I don't think any of us would feel comfortable directly appointing somebody to a BCU position or just any AS elected position based solely on the fact that they supported us during the campaign. I feel like it mainly has to do with merit. Does the person accurately represent the constituents that they're about to be accurately represent the constituents that they're about to be representing, for lack of better words? Do they have enough experience? Do they have the passion to do the job good? And judge it more on that rather than just support. And I think we said that maybe one of the only positions that you would probably use a lot of bias and like personal attachment to when directly appointing is if you were to hold an executive position and maybe chief of staff. But even then, it's more of like, you have to make sure that they can do the job, but also you're going to be constantly communicating with them. So it's very important that you feel comfortable with them, I think.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I think that that's a good reflection, that you would consider perhaps their qualifications for the position rather than their support or the pressure that you may feel to help them out. So thanks for sharing that. And then, so like I said, next is you, Shva, and then Gerlene, you're after that.
Great, hello. I know when our group talked about it, we didn't necessarily focus so much. I guess we made like supporter, but more so also went into like if you also kind of knew the person. And our group discussed like it honestly, when you're taking this into account in awkwardness, is it awkward? Do they just have like a small issue, or is it something bigger? So to first evaluate the conflict at hand and the severity of it and the impact it has, to make sure you don't cause harm, so that if they truly want the position, and you of course can't give it to them, but if they want the position, to give them the right to have a interviewer that would not make them feel awkward or whatever problem that is. And then, of course, not directly appointing them to the committee, because that takes away from the merit and the journey to get there. I think it's important, even if you think someone would be a great fit, for them to showcase that to others, and to be able to display their skill and merit and ability to take on whatever position they wanted, whether you agree with them or not. And then I said, for like, if there is no conflict, the best thing to do would honestly be, if you really had to say, to recuse yourself, because I feel like you already have bias if you already are wanting to put them in or interview them or give any say. So it's really important to recognize that as well, so that they have the most equitable journey to the position and just the resources to get there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate those, different phrases you use, like wanting to help them resolve the conflict, helping them advocate for themselves, and really your value of that equitable process. So thank you for fleshing that out for us. Appreciate it. So like I said, Gerlene, you're next, and then Caesar, you are after.
Yeah, so one of the main things that we talked about in our group was veering towards like conflict resolution. And I feel like a lot of us here have like had experience like within Senate and having conflicts that you can't just like, steer away from if you don't want to. And one of the things that I did mention was that, if this person wants to join the BCU and the conflict that they have is with someone within the BCU, those two people already have a shared interest. And so, they have a similar passion that they can work towards. And one of the things that I suggested was like creating an environment where you could be the mediator to the conversation to see what the conflict is, hopefully resolve it. Because one of the things I think Siobhan mentioned was like, you don't want to take away from the legitimacy of the process itself, the interview process, getting the person appointed, whether or not they're fit for the position. It's all a part of a process, and it's kind of taking away from that if you just like use whatever hypothetical executive authority you have to appoint them to the position, because at the end of the day, that conflict would still be there, and then they would still have to work together. So it's just kind of like putting duct tape over a situation that's, you can't actually just resolve by pretending that you did something.
Yeah, no, that is true. Thank you for sharing that. Also, I really appreciate in these responses how you all are kind of on your own highlighting these different values that Associated Students has that are reflected in our different processes for appointments and interviews and things like that. So thank you all for sharing. Caesar, you're next, and then after that, B.
Yeah, so Gerlene said most of what occurred in our group. We were in the same group, but I just did want to add that, what it boiled down to in our group was that, it was kind of delegitimizing the whole process of the interviewing for a BCU and rightfully earning your spot in that organization. And so, yeah, you make the process look dirty almost if you appoint someone who doesn't merit being there. They have to earn the right to sit.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I appreciate how many of you have highlighted that interest in the legitimacy of the appointments process. So thank you for sharing. And then B, you're next.
Hi everyone again. So I think it was in the first few slides I took a screenshot, I can't remember, but it said that you have to have trust in the organization of AS. And if you don't have trust, people aren't going to like us. And we're a great resource that we really want people to use. So if we're cutting corners, appointing people who might not be qualified or who say, can you just appoint me? It takes away from the entire organization. And so maintaining a level of professionalism and being cordial to get the job done is always the most important thing to do. I would say that if somebody I knew was saying, can you appoint me directly? That's kind of red flaggy, depending on the situation. So a lot of the people before me who spoke said, you know what, we need to know what the situation is. To eliminate all of this, I recommend that you all use the COC, Committees on Committees. They have a great appointing process. Gerline can probably add more, that our committee, the Internal Affairs Committee, we were appointing new members and we wanted zero bias. And so we've reached out to them and they did an amazing job eliminating everything because they had no ties to the individuals who were eligible to apply. And it was just a really smooth, beautiful process. So when you're appointing to BCU, reach out to the COC. That's my plug. Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, okay, and then I see also, before we move on to the next one, Colton shared in the chat, we also talked about how a nice middle ground would be an endorsement for someone we support. So thanks for sharing that, Colton. And then anybody else have anything to share on this scenario or this topic? Shiva, I see your hand again.
Hello. I just wanted to quickly also add that not liking someone is not enough to necessarily like skip steps or an excuse to like evade things. I want to say kind of like what had been added previously. Professionalism is key. And in life and also in this association, you might not get along with everyone. You actually don't have to get along with everyone nor agree with what they're saying. However, none of that should affect or at least adversely affect your job to remain cordial, to work efficiently with them, and to get projects, tasks, bills, resolutions, whatever done for the sake of constituents and the organization as a whole. And so when you get into things like this, that's incredibly selfish and also it's not professional. So to always remember to maintain, retain, and strive for a constant level of professionalism that should be upheld all the time, but especially in these committees, because not liking someone or having kind of awkward encounters has nothing to do with your job, how important it is, and its impact in what you're doing. And that's something also that you should always remember. And that's what I forgot to add.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing. I really have appreciated hearing everyone's perspective on these topics so far. So next, let's go ahead and move to our third scenario and our last one. The scenario reads, an organization or group approaches you during campaigning. They have a large network of students associated with them. They're offering to endorse your candidacy in exchange for support of their agenda. Do you accept? Does your answer change if you disagree with this organization's mission? All right, welcome back, everyone. So how did this scenario discussion go for you? Does anybody have anything they would like to share? Perspectives, thoughts, questions?
I can share again. I told my group twice, and I'm sorry that they have to hear it a third time now, but I just said that whether or not my agenda like aligns with that of like an organization, I am much more comfortable receiving an endorsement that is more organic and is stemming from my agenda being presented and organizations following through with that, because it gives me an understanding that this is something other students are having, rather than kind of being pushed into a specific agenda and maybe being convinced that like that is good, and not having much, not leaving enough room for like other students or other organizations to kind of give that same thing. Whereas like if you are presenting an agenda when you're campaigning, organizations that will endorse you more than likely have an agenda that aligns with it. And so that kind of endorsement and support should come naturally instead of a little bit more pushy. And that's why just kind of like the scenario was a little different. And then if like if I disagree with the organization's missions, again, it kind of goes back to the scenario one, where it's just kind of like, does that mission bring any harm to other groups of students? And if so, like, how big is that harm? And is there a way that like I can do it? But in terms of like just getting support, because it's a much bigger scale, like that's kind of not my thing. That kind of seems a little shady to kind of take that kind of direction.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the way that you worded that as an organic relationship, right? That you allow for it almost to be like shared goals and shared vision rather than a quid pro quo. So I appreciate the way that you phrase that. Thank you. Can I get another participant to share, please, what maybe their group shared about? You don't have to share your own answers. Maybe somebody else in your breakout group had an awesome thought or idea. Did everyone come to the same conclusion that that is how you would answer this scenario, is to allow a relationship to develop more naturally? Or is there a different perspective?
I personally don't see a problem with accepting their endorsement, so long as their I guess their mission or their values align with yours, because they're the same. So it's not like they're changing your values, and you gain support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that that's a good distinction that you're making, that you would want to align your campaign and your work with somebody that you share values and a mission with, but that you would not compromise your values for the sake of this relationship, is what I'm hearing you say. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
I had something just kind of more general than this specific campaign. This could be whether you're already in a position, but for myself, when I was a senator, I mean, no one approached me to, offer favors, but I personally don't think that exchanging of favors in any way really is the best idea to get agendas accomplished. I think, as someone pointed, more organically, it really should happen on its own, and not really this kind of, oh, if I do this for you, you do this for me. That's just my opinion, but that's just something that I wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you, Austin. I appreciate that. All right, everyone, welcome back. Thanks so much for participating. I know we're just about at 4 o'clock, so I want to ask for just a couple of folks to share what some of their discussion was about, any comments they have for this particular scenario, and then we can go ahead and wrap things up. And Haley, I see your hand first, and then next is Esme.
In my group, I think we all pretty much agreed that we would not personally be able to accept an endorsement if we didn't agree with the organization's mission, because if it would contradict our platform and what we're running for, we feel like that wouldn't be fair to our constituency. But then Colton made a good point that if a large portion of your constituency does align with the organization's mission or agenda, then to reconsider it, maybe, if it doesn't hurt the people that you are representing.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for sharing. Esme and then Shannon.
Kind of in the same line where it's like by nature of like what endorsements are, if I'm not going to go to an organization that I do not have like some ideological or like identical, like identity-based like alignment with, like if we are not going to support one another in terms of like both things and policies that we want to enact or the change that we want to see, I'm not going to go to you for an endorsement as a candidate because it's not this being an ethics workshop and me about to call this unethical, but like, yes, it's an unethical action to take. And B, it's performative. I'm uninterested in pursuing organizations that we do not align in terms of support because that would be dishonest of me. And I'm not going to promise you that I'm going to enact policies on your behalf if we are not in alignment of the actual change we want to see in common. And just to be like essentially courteous with the people we do ask for endorsements, but we will continue to serve and like relay the information that we gave them and like the promises we made them to kind of enact them to the best of our ability.
Yeah, I appreciate how you highlighted that you consider an endorsement kind of like a mutual relationship where you can support each other, or really that you're working towards common goals. So thanks so much for sharing that. Shannon, you're next, and then April.
Yeah, in my group, we were definitely kind of all along the lines of if we don't agree with this organization, like if it goes along with our morals, then we wouldn't be able to accept their endorsement. And at the same time, like if those are against my values, or even if like I think that their agenda is not what I could do to best serve the students I'm representing. So even if like what they're pushing isn't necessarily bad or something I disagree with, but I think like food security is a more important issue, then I might not accept that endorsement just because I think I wouldn't be able to support their agenda because I was working on other issues that I value.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, that not accepting an endorsement may not necessarily mean that you don't agree with an organization's mission, just that you have a different focus. So that's great. Thank you. April, you're next, and then Abby.
Yeah, I basically wanted to say the same thing that Esme said. I think like endorsement in itself is like you won't ask for an endorsement from an organization that you think won't benefit your constituents or like aren't really serving your constituents, and that you guys don't have the same mission. So I think like in that case you should definitely not accept that, because and also endorsement, like once you're endorsed by an org, like whether or not you're elected, you should still reach out to them to see how you can work with them, how you can better fulfill the mission, and how you can spread their mission, and to do more like work together to spread what you are both passionate about. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate the point you made about continuing to stay connected with that organization. You know, I think it speaks to Esme's point about it being, you know, mutual support, and that, you know, that kind of signifies what endorsement seems to mean to each of you that have shared that. So thank you so much for highlighting that again. And then next, Abby, and then Shabal.
Yeah, kind of going off what everyone said, I think it's really important that if you're endorsed by someone that you then have the courage to represent them in Senate. And so when you take someone's endorsement, you take it knowing that you have to then like represent their needs. And so you shouldn't take an endorsement that you don't feel fully comfortable with everyone knowing, you know, what you support. I think that's really important.
Yeah, thank you. And then Shabal, you're next.
Yes. So I kind of like our group, we kind of all agreed with all those things, and then basically like an endorsement, the inherent nature is that someone is asking you to, or you're agreeing to take on an agenda. And so just really basically understanding and being prepared to actually like advocate, support, and represent that agenda, not just like in concept and because it looks good and like you like it, but to actually actively do it, to represent, to speak up, to advocate, and to do all these things like actively and consistently, and not just like oh, I agree, like you kind of have to be loud because you, not loud, but you have to actively support and advocate. That's like what your position is. And so just understand that. And I feel like a quote that sums it up really well is to like walk it like you talk it. You can't just say it, but like back it up with action. I feel like that's the biggest thing with scenario 3 is your action should follow it. And if you don't feel comfortable with that action, don't take it. Or if you don't want to do it, don't take it, and to understand that mutual agreement with all of it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So I know we're a couple minutes past 4, but I don't want to cut anybody off if they have any extra feedback or discussion they want to share. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add to this?
I said this in the last group, so I want to say it here, kind of just to close. As an elected person, I think the idea of trading favors just for me doesn't sit well. Even if it's like someone who you're really close with, I don't really just like the idea of like trading favors, like I do this for you, you do this for me. So I just wanted to share that, if you're gonna agree to something, maybe really think like, do I really want to trade favors, or just like I'm doing this for you, and if you do something for me, like it doesn't really matter, but just like maybe something to think about.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Austin. I hope that these scenarios and discussion points help you kind of think about the way that you approach some of these questions, what you consider your values to be, and hopefully if you had others that had a different perspective than you, it helps you kind of consider how others will approach different scenarios about values and ethics. So I hope that you found this helpful. Headed to your inbox. The date on the slide is incorrect because I forgot to change it, so we'll overlook that for just a moment. But the first thing headed to your inbox is an ethics pledge for your signature. You'll need to return this to Elections Board to complete your ethics requirements. This session was the first of those. The Elections Board will have the deadline in the email that they send to you, so keep an eye out for that. Next is going to be the UCOP Statement of Ethical Values, the UCSB Principles of Community, and UCSB Code of Conduct. These are what I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation as examples of, essentially what they are, statements of ethical values. You won't need to review these unless you want to. They're just to provide examples of what ethics statements look like, what value statements look like, particularly the UCSB Principles of Community. It's really about our values and how our behavior is impacted by that. So hopefully you find that helpful. And you may have already seen some of these, particularly the Code of Conduct. And then if there are any ethics violations, as the university calls them, or anything that you need to report, I wanted to provide these 3 points here. The first is going to be to the AS Elections Board. I've included their email here if you have any questions, but on their website, they do have a report portal for you to file a report. So you can go ahead and use that or email them if you have any questions. The next is going to be the bias incident response. And you can see the link here. Like I said, I'm going to email you these slides. You can screenshot it if you like, but the slides also will have the link in there if you would like to use that. This is going to be for, as indicated by the name, any like incidents of bias. So this could be gender, race, etc. Those are going to be reported here. And this is differentiated from the last point here, which is the Office of Student Conduct, which focuses more broadly on the UCSB Student Code of Conduct. And so this is the link here for that. Like I said, it's a super awkward link. There's probably a better one somewhere, but like I said, you'll be able to have a clickable link for that. So just wanted to share those resources before we take off. And then the last not poll question, how now would you rate your understanding of ethics? So go ahead and use the same emojis as before. already see one or two. That's great. Hopefully, like I said, the understanding has improved, or at the very least, it was interesting for you. So thank you all so much for the emojis. That is the end here. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop my screen share. It's so great to see all of your faces.